Your host, and this is Community Forum. We're very fortunate this evening to have people from the Equal Rights Amendment we're going to be discussing, and we have our co-host Tara Thomas. To her left is Janine Marie Duray. All right. She's ERA State Campaign Coordinator for Illinois, and she's the National Issues Teams Coordinator of Progressive Democrats of America. And our anchor person is Denise Rothiemer, and she's the founder, legislative author of Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence. Greetings, folks.
Greetings.
We're very happy that all of you are taking time for your busy schedule to talk about a most needed amendment to the Illinois Constitution. It's proposed the Equal Rights Amendment. And Tara, I wonder, why is there a need for an Equal Rights Amendment? Have you been keeping up with that?
I have, both as a minority and as a woman. And talking to the ladies prior to the show, I even learned some additional information that was even more depressing.
Well, we go find out
about why we don't have equal rights. So.
Maybe we'll start with Janine. Jeannie. Okay. Oh, boy, I don't know. So it's late in the evening, I guess. You want to tell us that? Give us a little background on the Equal Rights Amendment first.
Sure. The Equal Rights Amendment is a very simple amendment, so let's start there.
Okay.
It says, and I'll read it so we have the actual wording, the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any other state on account of sex.
It seems simple to me.
Very simple.
So then if it's that simple and it reads very well, is it part of the Constitution, number one?
No, it is not.
Not part of the Constitution?
No.
Interesting.
Yes. In fact, a little over 40 years ago, the United States Congress finally, it had been reintroduced year after year for, I guess it would have been 60 years at that point. They finally decided that they would move it to ratification.
Okay.
And in moving it to ratification, that meant that 2/3 of the Congress supported it, and that now 38 of the 50 states would also have to ratify it in their state houses in order to make it a United States constitutional amendment.
Okay.
So they began work on this, and in fact, in the 70s, it moved very, very quickly, and suddenly they arrived at 35 states. Now, one of the weird things that happened with this amendment was they put a ratification deadline on it. They gave it a deadline of 8 years. Most constitutional amendments do not have a deadline, but this one did. They got to the point where they needed 3 more states to ratify. In fact, all the northern states, except for Illinois, had ratified it, and where they really were meeting difficulty was in the southern states and in Utah and Nevada. So Illinois ended up becoming the battleground state for the ERA at that point. The deadline, the 8-year deadline, ran out, and so ERA activists went back to the United States Congress and said that they would like the deadline extended. So they gave them 3 additional years. And even giving them 3 additional years, the campaign to stop the ERA was so fierce here in Illinois that it still did not get passed and completely stalled out and stopped.
Why do you think people feel threatened by the ERA that they wouldn't want to pass it here in Illinois? Why do you think, and I have to say they meaning men, although I don't know, because we just had a vote 2 years ago or a year ago where the women in the U.S. Congress and Senate voted it down.
Right. So. It's interesting because especially if you speak with younger men, they typically do support it. One of the biggest issues that we see in this country right now, and that we've all heard a lot about, is the Fair Pay Act.
Yes.
And the Lilly Ledbetter Act. And,
yes.
and a lot of legislation they want to move forward in order to protect women's wages, because we know women are not earning what they should be, not in comparison to their male counterparts.
Okay.
So what's interesting is I think where we're seeing a lot of the backlash is from a lot of corporations, a lot of companies. One of the groups, ALEC, which deals with the creation of legislation, they actually have been against the ERA from the get-go. So I think this is where we're seeing the pushback. And you start to see that reality exists in the numbers breakdown as well. So like the Department of Labor did a study on wages.
Okay.
And in that study, they found that for every dollar a man earns, it broke down like this. Asian women make 87 cents for that same dollar. White women make 78 cents on that same dollar. African American women make 64 cents on that same dollar. Native American women make 60 cents on that same dollar.
Okay.
And all the way down at the bottom are Latina women who are only making 53 cents on that same dollar for that same job, for that same work.
I wonder if those numbers were released. You know, we have people right now marching in New York and LA and everywhere else about someone getting killed. But I wonder if these numbers were released and public knew it, and women knew it, if we wouldn't be out in the street rallying. Because this is outrageous.
It is.
This is outrageous.
It is.
We know it.
I don't think we know. I didn't know I was making 64%. I didn't know that, honest to God. And I didn't know Asian women were the highest paid.
Yeah.
No, I'm not racist or anything like that, but that's good to know. I mean, we're in this country. Did you think they were making more than all the other women?
Well, the argument to that is women have to be able to ask for the pay that they feel they deserve. And if a woman settles for 87 cents to the dollar or any other amount, then that was her choice.
But do you think that they know? I mean, I don't know, because how many people actually know what the person's makes next
Well,
year?
I remember when I was in insurance.
Okay.
And I went for a position, and I was told that there is an X amount of salary. I was actually offered lower than that amount. And I said no. I said the position allows for this amount of salary. That's the amount that I'm here for. Some people may not take a stand for themselves. They may say, okay, it's that much. I thought it was this much. And then the interviewer could say, well, based on experience or based on whatever, and get you to give in to the amount they want to pay you, because business is not personal. You know, they're in there to make a profit, and everybody has to be his or her own salesperson. So if you are going to go in there and you're going to advocate for yourself and know what the amount is, then you make the best argument and you get that.
And the problem is, when you, especially nowadays, once you enter at that salary, you can stay there for like 4 or 5, 6 years.
In,
That's the
in
problem.
this economy,
Yes.
that
But no one's
doesn't
giving
matter
raises
if you're
across the
male
board.
or female.
Yes.
It's the economy is the big
And you're
factor.
stuck there because they're
Yes.
not handing out raises. Like years
Right.
ago, you can get a raise every 2 years, every 18 months.
Right.
You come in at $50,000, you could be there for 5, 6 years at $50,000. Meanwhile, everything else is going up. Gas is going up. Food is going. Eggs. Oh my God! You guys been in the supermarket, see the price of eggs
Yeah.
and bacon. It's like $6 a pound.
Yeah.
But whose salary is going up to compensate with that?
And we
Right.
see that happen,
Yes.
especially when people get to the retirement, because when you look at the poverty rates for women in this country, over the age of 65, it's 1 in 7 women that are living below the poverty line at this point. So, you know, like you said, when you have those lower wages, that is going to carry across, and it's going to affect their Social Security. It's going to affect their savings. It's going to affect their ability to own a home and have the security of owning a home later in life. It's going to affect a lot of things.
So why do you think, I don't want to say it's just, you know, sexism. I don't want to say that. But why do you think men are threatened by women making the same amount of pay?
As I said, I don't know that they are. You know, in the household that I grew up in, and, you know, my parents were born just prior to the baby boomer generation. My mother always made more than my father. And my father was not threatened by that. In fact, he often helped her to advocate for a better salary.
Wow.
So I think in a lot of households, there may be some men who do feel that way, but I think there's a lot of men who don't, because I think there's a lot of men out there who say, this is the economics of my family, this is my household. So if my wife is going to spend time outside the house working, and she's only going to bring home half or 3/4 of what she should be making, our whole family is losing out.
So now, because it came home, now it's affecting them. And if you go with this new cultural term of modern family, okay, except every family is different nowadays. We're all just a modern family. A lot of men are staying home.
Yes.
Okay, and they're raising women. I find that very odd when I see that, but that's our society is evolving. So when men are at home, generally it's because the woman makes more money.
Yes.
She may have more degrees. She might be an engineer or a doctor or whatever, and that's happening quite often. So now they're concerned with her making equal pay. I think that's just wonderful.
What about the single parent?
I think it's a great effect there too, because father, if there's a father out there who is paying child support, he's not going to be paying. He's not going to be having to pay so much in terms of when you start looking at alimony and housing costs and additional things that come around the child support. When his wife is able to earn a living. If the wife can't earn a living, that's when things like alimony come into the picture.
Oh, in some cases, women are paying alimony now.
This is true.
There's a new show on now, Girls' Design of Divorce, something like that. And it's all about how she has to pay the alimony.
Of course.
Because he hasn't worked in 10 years. I thought that
right.
was
I mean, here in Illinois, child support is based on a formula. So, there's a percentage of income paid per child.
Okay.
So essentially, even in a divorce situation, if the wife's earning less, the kids are getting less.
Yes.
And, and like I said, it also leads to the potential for alimony and other things creeping into that equation that the other spouse may have to cover because the wife makes less.
So if it's been this year for like 40, it's been this way for 60 years. Okay? I mean, people are just fighting this, just fighting. I mean, we've been able to get African Americans free. We've been able to now have equal rights for the gay community. We've been able to have people marry same-sex marriages. We even have adoptions by everybody. Why can't we get this passed?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question that we have. Last year, Progressive Democrats of America, which is the organization I work for, we decided early on last year that we were going to pick this up and try to make this legislation move, both at the federal level and to ratify through the states. When we picked it up at the federal level, it had been reintroduced year after year, but not getting anywhere. So we went to the legislators that were introducing that legislation, and we said that we would get them the co-sponsors that they needed.
Okay.
And we would assist with that work. So we began working on the Hill. Now, interestingly enough, this legislation has not gained Republican support. In fact, as a whole, the Republican Party has been very much against it, which is very disappointing because this legislation actually originates with the Republican Party. So it's a strange about face that we're seeing. But what was interesting is in the Senate, in the United States Senate, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland and Senator Mark Kirk here in Illinois are the two co-sponsors of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Okay.
So,
good for Mark Kirk.
Yeah, so we're very pleased and very proud of the fact that Mark Kirk was willing to step up and be a part of this. But he is the only Republican that's been willing to be a part of this in the Congress. And then he did go a step further in terms of he even wrote a Dear Colleague letter that we were supplied with to bring to fellow members of the Congress in order to sway them to come on board.
This goes back to what I think Denise was saying earlier, and when she made me, I think I said to you guys that there were things I didn't know until we were off air, and that is that it's the religious right that's keeping things status quo. Would you want to address that?
Based on the research I did, the Republicans were the ones, as she mentioned, spearheading this whole movement. And what happened is, up until I think around Ronald Reagan's time, not too long before then, there was a woman, I can't recall her name. I was watching a series, a documentary. It's a whole series on this issue, the women's rights movement.
Okay.
And when the women's rights movement was taking storm and getting a lot of support, there was a woman who decided that she was going to counter all this success. And they actually came to Illinois and fought to defeat this. And her reasoning, the logic was, the women who did not want to see this passed believed that the women who were feminists, let's just put out the terms, feminists, were giving the housewives a bad rep, a bad image, like they were kind of dissing on them, to say, you know, we want to be liberated. You want to be liberated from your husband. You want to be liberated from your role as a mother. These are the greatest accomplishments that you can achieve in a lifetime. Why would you want to liberate yourself from that glory? It's your God-given destiny. So with the religious content to it, you know, that's biblically our role. The man is the head of the household. So it's all this indoctrination, kind of like with the gays and lesbians, how they were discriminated against because of a lot of religious indoctrination and biblical teaching. Same thing with slaves. So you have to kind of break down the indoctrination to be able to logically process the sense behind equality on all levels. So it really wasn't until that woman decided to take a stand and go against it, and then Ronald Reagan was pretty much the first one to oppose it, and then it kind of fizzled out from there. But, you know, and it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. You know, we in Illinois, how long have we had a Democrat-run, controlled, you know, governor, Senate, House? I believe the ERA passed in the Senate just this past year. It never got to the House, so really it fell in the House. The Senate, I do know Christine Radogno, who's a senator, she's a Republican, supported it. So it did go through the Senate, so we can't pinpoint and blame.
So it's
Republicans.
It's a bipartisan issue.
It's a nonpartisan issue, really. What it has mostly to do about, based on my readings and research, it's the Constitution is a contract, as I was explaining earlier. And basically, it's interpreted based on content and conduct. The reason why Africans have had to suffer so much is because they weren't allowed to take the natives and make them slaves. So they were allowed to go to Africa and bring them over here to make them slaves. So it's because when the Constitution came, when it said all people are created equal, we the people, it's interpreted differently. Even when the 15th Amendment passed, you know, giving the right to vote, there's still some discrimination because of interpretation. And so when you ask, why is the Equal Rights Amendment so important, I'll go through this interesting Illinois case because, you know, we love Illinois.
Please. Please.
There's a woman who, she wanted to become a lawyer. She took the bar, passed, and all of that, and this was 1869. So the Illinois Supreme Court denied her application on the basis that she was a woman.
In 1869?
Yes, because they said that a married woman is legally disabled. So you have to understand, kind of like with Scripture, when you read it, you can't just take it literally. You have to know the background, the culture. So we have to understand women who are married were legally disabled. They didn't have their rights like an individual man. So then it says that the Supreme Court found against her argument that one is a privilege and immunity of women as citizens to engage in any and every provision, occupation, or employment in civil life. So the Supreme Court said, no, we don't agree with that. In fact, a historical fact that the right to choose one's profession has ever been established as one of the fundamental privileges and immunities of the sex. The paramount destiny and mission of the women are to fulfill the noble and benign offices of wife and mother.
This was in what?
So this is 1869 in Illinois. So because of the interpretation and the content and the conduct that we're coming from, we have to realize there's all different types of discrimination that women, because of gender not being protected in the Constitution, can be susceptible to. And when you create the equality for the gender of women, you create the equality of gender for men, because gender is both.
Would you be surprised to know women most women probably are not aware of that and think that they do have equal rights because of the 19th Amendment.
Yes.
That's interesting. I mean, if you ask this, oh no, we're fine, we're done. That happened in the 19th. That was 60 years ago.
That just gives you the right to vote without being discriminated based on gender.
Right.
And it's interesting, too, even just a few years ago, Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia stated that women are not protected from discrimination under the law. So that's coming from somebody who's sitting on the highest court in the land and who has the ability to make decisions in these cases.
That's our 14th Amendment.
Right.
Right.
The Equal Protection Clause.
Right. So apparently the Equal Protection Clause, as stated by one of our own Supreme Court justices, is not adequate protection for women.
So what can we do to get it in the Constitution? Because I think, this country says that they live and die and we are built on the Constitution. But they're passing all these rights, all these amendments, and they're not putting them in the Constitution. Can't we amend it?
Sure. And that's basically what we're working on at this point.
Okay.
So there is a piece of legislation that is moving at the federal level that would completely eradicate the deadline for the Equal Rights Amendment so that we could complete the work on it. We've also had the Congressional Research Office look at what we call the three-state strategy to see that we can continue moving the work at the state level. So that would mean that right now, even though the deadline is in place, if we were to ratify the ERA here in Illinois, Nevada, Florida, or any other state, that once the ratification deadline was removed at the federal level, that work would still be valid.
Okay.
So those campaigns are currently going on. So yes, Illinois is again the battleground state. However, we also have legislation moving in 7 other states currently.
Well, there are many, I put an asterisk by the amendment you just read, the article, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. And like Tara said, most women believe that took care of it.
Right.
But now we have an equal rights amendment. We need three states, and Illinois is one of the 3, need passage. And I believe you only need, how many votes? It was pretty close to passing, right?
We need 71 votes in the Illinois House to pass it. We're pretty confident we can move it again in this new session through the Illinois Senate because it went very, very well this last time.
And we want to know why there's so many challenges. You think it's realistic to believe that if you pass this, then women understand that they will have all the rights to go into the battlefield like men? This was some of the opponents bringing it out. Well, I say opponents, but this is what really happened. They have all the rights of men, and a lot of women don't even want that.
Yeah,
they think women should be in the household.
Well, I mean, I think this is part of it. I mean, this means that, this amendment in itself makes no new law. But what it does do is it gives teeth to the laws that are in place as well as any laws we would put in place. So, for example, if we take the Fair Pay Act, for instance, right now, if that were to be challenged in the Supreme Court, based on what Judge Anton Scalia has stated, it would not pass muster in terms of women being able to be protected with that status. If we pass the Equal Rights Amendment, then that Fair Pay Act would be shored up, and they would thus have a legal precedent to say, yes, women have a protected status, and therefore their pay is protected too by the Fair Pay Act.
Is there any way we could guarantee if that does, let's say it passes, let's say take the high road to pass, how could we ensure that women are being paid the same?
Well, I think there's a lot of different measures that can be taken. And, one of the things that Denise pointed out, applying for a job where they stated what the standard pay was. Most jobs don't.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Most jobs don't do that. They were kind of lucky.
Right. So I think, being able to put standards in so that we have something to judge by, so that, women can go in and negotiate their pay properly, so that when also too, you also see a lot of laws that state that you cannot speak with other employees about what your pay is. If you can't talk to other employees about what your pay is, you won't know if you're being cheated on your pay.
Right. And that was my question. But in addition to this topic, we're also talking about women's rights, victims' rights.
Yeah.
And I just, if you don't mind addressing that for me, Denise, because I notice here that you're on your mission, it states, with victims, criminal justice and rights. Why are you involved in this cause?
I became involved in the cause after going through the criminal justice system, after my daughter was raped at the age of 11, and having learned, coming out of it within a 6-month time span. I mean, it was very fast. I kind of had to look back and say, whoa, wait, what just happened here? Where's the justice? And I couldn't believe that as an American citizen, because I'm a single mom, I'm about as feminist as you can get, and very independent. I really don't have vulnerabilities until I came across something I knew nothing about, and that was the laws. See, we don't know what rights you have, if you have rights. We don't know what the process is, the procedures. We don't know all these court actors, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys. We don't know terminology. We don't understand, you know, all the details that can literally turn your life upside down if you become railroaded. And that's a form of oppression. So I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to tolerate being oppressed because of the injustice. I'm going to learn everything there is to know about this system, the laws, our rights, what can be done to remedy it. So after I went through what I refer to as the hamster wheel of bureaucracy, because you call up this department, they say call that guy, you call that guy, no, call this one. It's bureaucracy. So what they do is they put you through all this red tape where nobody has an answer. Nobody can do anything.
Hoping you'll just quit?
Yeah, give up. And I thought to myself, well, I'm an American citizen, and that didn't set with me. How can I be an American citizen in this great country, as patriotic as I am, and be so oppressed? It didn't make sense. So then I had no other choice than to call my state rep. And I met with him, and he said, you know, when we wrote the law, we didn't realize the unintended consequences. And so he thanked me for sharing my story, like I was the first one he had heard from. And he asked me, well, what would you recommend? So I gave him the answers. And based on that, it took me 10 years to get that law changed. 10 years in our system of the Senate and the House. And so going from the criminal justice system, where there's all this oppression and injustice on the people, we Americans, and then you go into your legislative body to, as a sovereign, because we the people are sovereign, they're there to represent us and act in our interest. You come to find there's the special interest groups, there's the lobbyists. So you as a tax-paying voting citizen have little to no influence versus these giant conglomerates that are totally taking the attention and focus of our legislators because of whatever agenda they want to serve, which is more than likely re-election. And that's why you don't have laws like the Equal Rights Amendment passed, because somebody came in with an agenda. That's why I had to work to pass the laws that I did, because you have people sitting in our legislature, and it's not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans, it's not about males, and it's not about females, it's not black, it's not white. It's about the lack of responsibility to the constituency. It's about thinking you're the sovereign and turning the tables on us.
So if you had been a man, that's where I'm going to go. I was going to go there before you stated it. Do you think it would have made a difference if a male had pursued the answers to the questions that you had, or it's just a system?
No, definitely not. I ended up working with a male survivor of domestic violence, and in the work I do, I don't use gender I don't use race. I don't use any of these identifiers.
You just think it's the system? It's just our system? It's inapt?
Absolutely.
Just the
Absolutely. It's the system.
So
because
what is maintaining it? Why can't we have elected officials change it? We were going to have an elected official here tonight. But why can't we get it changed if it's just that simple?
Because if you look at Congress and where we are with the economy,
Yes.
with the banks and corporations taking over the rights of people,
Yes.
when you have elected officials profiting from their positions of power that we give them, and then they come into our face in our community, at our events,
Yes.
and sit behind their desk when we're at a meeting,
Yes.
telling us how much they really want to help us and serve us. But then behind closed doors, nothing gets done, but then the person who's actually visiting that elected official wants to give them an award because they took my call. They're coming to my event. Let's throw a parade because we have a cell phone number of our representative. Meanwhile, you have no rights. Meanwhile, you're going to live in poverty. Meanwhile, if you're not a crony, then you're going to be out with the rest of the 99% of us.
I think what Denise is saying here is really true. You know, in my position at Progressive Democrats of America, and with the ERA campaign here in Illinois, we do what's called an Educate Congress campaign. So each month, we put together a list of legislation, and we ask the members of Congress to sponsor that legislation, so they'll vote yes for this legislation. And we cover approximately 450 congressmen and senators each month. Now, the ERA has been on that list. And we have thousands of people going out, calling up these offices, faxing these letters, personally delivering them, going to Washington, D.C., and these are constituents. And yet, we don't have the votes to pass it, and they're hitting 450 offices on certain months. And that fluctuates anywhere between 350 and 450. And when those constituents are calling and faxing and emailing and personally showing up and scheduling appointments, and it's continuously going on, and still the legislation's not getting sponsored, that tells you what Denise is saying is very true. The corporations are running the game, the banks are running the game, and because they are lining many of these congressional members' pockets, they are not listening to what constituents have to say.
Well, two things. One, I just found out, well, not recently, that, you know, corporations are people. Okay? So, yeah.
So is the party.
Yeah, so it's no longer this abstract
Democrats
thing.
and Republicans, the
Right.
party, they
They're
have
people
more
now.
rights than the people.
Exactly. So since that happened, now we all know corporations are people too. So how is it to their advantage to not approve this?
Well,
Because I would think it would be to their advantage to approve it, but apparently I'm wrong.
with the Equal Rights Amendment, as far as, because you have to realize before the corporations and the banks all got into the mix, this was already on the table.
Right.
Basically, it's more with the religious sector. It's more with the indoctrination. It's more with this idea that you want to keep, and you have to understand, I being a single parent, I was mother, father, you know, both. I love being a stay-at-home mom, even though I had no husband, but I managed to pull that off. I value more than anything my role as a mother, which is why I think, you know, when that happened to my child, it became something that I could never turn back from, because I just didn't want any child, any parent to suffer, you know, that kind of injustice. So I really believe that we as women, thank God we can give birth, you know, amen to that, and those who adopt and want to bring life into this world and raise children. And yes, it does take a maternal, you know, influence, and especially paternal influence to make a child whole. That's why I never had another child, because I knew raising my daughter without the father was a detriment to her, because it's best that the child does have both. But that's the ideal world, and ideal world's not always meant for everyone.
Exactly.
So I agree with the principles that, Mom, if you can't stay home, great. But Mom, if you want to go out and work, don't deny her. And for the moms who are lucky and able to stay home because they have a supportive husband who does fill that shoe, then great, but don't deny that to other women. And it's not offensive. It's kind of like with the gay rights. There was a lot of people that did not want two men to marry, two women to marry, because they felt it was like an abomination, that it's so against the church and it's so against the Bible, and we're a Christian nation. So they were so fearful of that event taking place. But finally, against that, the gays and lesbians were victorious, because, and that's the same thing with women. Somehow we've been put in a position biblically where we're the legally disabled, the one whose role is the wife and the mother, and that means that you're not head of the house. You're not the breadwinner. You're not the one going out there earning the career.
Well, that kind of takes me back to what earlier when you said the separation between, in the Constitution, there's a separation between religion and state. So for them to be using this religious aspect to not approve this, that's disturbing. I find that disturbing. And secondly, I think it's very disturbing that we have approved every other major discrimination, African Americans, gay rights, and seriously, we've approved almost everything. Why are we at a stalemate on this?
Well, I think part of it, part of what Denise is saying is right with it being a religious extremist faction, but I think too in that religious extremist fashion, you also have to follow the money and follow the organizations that they're associated with. When you look at the Stop ERA campaign run by Phyllis Schlafly, who ran it before and continues to live here in Illinois, in fact, she is also working with the National Right to Life organization. Now, National Right to Life organization has been a pro-life organization for years, but about 15 years ago, they changed a lot of the language on their website, and it no longer talked about pro-life politicians, but instead specifically talked about Republican politicians.
Interesting.
You saw this turn happen in the Catholic Church as well, where Catholic bishops began talking to Republicans, but not Democrats, and often shunning Democrats. In fact, there was one archbishop in the country who I won't name, who, when he was introduced to a Democratic congressman, he refused to shake his hand, saying there were no good Democrats.
I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay.
So what happened is that basically you've had a conservative movement that became hijacked by the Republican Party under the Reagan campaign. And the Reagan campaign, created this coalition of religious organizations and family groups and such, and they got behind this and pushed the idea that women shouldn't have equal rights. They also pushed the idea of all the welfare queens who had Cadillacs and big screen TVs, yet no one could ever find one of these people that they talked about. I mean, so we basically entered into an era where anybody that we didn't want to give equal rights to, equal pay to, equal access to, and equal opportunity to, we painted them as other and as somehow unworthy of those things.
True. Very
and
true.
so these organizations continue to pair together, and the Republican Party has taken the ERA off their platform, and they've come together as a group backed by the banks, backed by the corporations, and are moving forward with this agenda. And so while there's a lot of Republicans who personally are in agreement with the idea of the Equal Rights Amendment, the party is pushing something else because of this issue. And then that also bleeds over into the Democratic Party because they're also in bed with the banks and the corporations, and many of them with the National Right to Life organization. So what we encountered here in Illinois this year, which was really very disturbing, was the National Right to Life organization and the Stop ERA campaign came together, and they made part of their candidate questionnaire for state legislators about the ERA, and basically asking legislators to vote against the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, what this has to do with the right to life is mind-boggling, because it makes no sense. This has nothing to do with abortion. There's no language here about abortion. It's not about reproductive rights. And in fact, one of the things we do know is that when women are economically less well off, they tend to have abortions. If women were making equal pay, if women had equal access, if women weren't being discriminated against housing contracts and all sorts of other things across the board, women wouldn't be in a position saying, I can't afford this baby, I can't afford to take care of this child, and they wouldn't be moving towards the idea of having an abortion. And so when women are doing better economically, we see abortion rates go down. So if anything, for the National Right to Life Committee to get together with the Stop ERA campaign is completely an obtuse angle to take, because it goes against the very thing I think that they are trying to achieve, which is less or no abortions.
So well, thank you, Dr. Brooks, for giving us this forum, this platform where we can address this, but I'm just wondering, because I do believe most women think that they have equal rights. I believe that. And that when they hear it, the only issue at this point will be equal pay. I think that's the primary issue, which if we keep it in the foreground, it does draw the men. I think the women will agree, that we don't have equal pay.
Well, what about the objectors that saying public funding will be used for abortion? There's just one roadblock.
No, you're right. That has come up. In fact, many states have an equal rights clause put into their constitution. Illinois actually has a clause in their constitution that was put in 1970. However, we're not publicly funding abortions here in Illinois.
Okay,
now,
great.
in New York State, they put it in an ERA, but it specifically has language stating that the state must help fund abortions. So, of course, there it's happening. So I think, when you start talking about reproductive issues, those are a separate issue from equal rights.
Well, I think it's interesting that they blocked that issue of abortion, but they support, you can get insurance to cover Viagra.
Right.
Now, I just have a real problem with that. I am so sorry. And again, and it's because of those who are in control. But insurance will pay, and I don't hear the Catholic Church or anybody else, and I'm Catholic, so I can say it, I don't hear anyone coming out against paying for Viagra. And you can get that on your insurance. And I think those pills are like $12 a pill. I don't even know. But they're an enormous amount.
That's a nice idea.
but you can't have
I'm
it.
eating one.
But you can't have it both ways. You know what I'm saying? You can't say, well, for women, if you want to have an abortion because you're a child, now we're an abortion issue, because you can't afford it. Just like you stated. It goes back to what you can afford.
It does.
But if you can't afford to do something else, we'll pay for Viagra, which costs more than
but why can't you?
contraceptives.
Why is it that you think that you can't have it both ways? Why are you under the impression that our government is a logically functioning body representative of the interests of the people?
Oh, I am not.
Well, that's the point. See, we all have to realize and come to the conclusion that our representatives are not functioning nor operating in our interests. That's why you have the illogical issues that you're talking about with Viagra and Burkittrol and this and this and that. The reason why it's so far stretched, I mean, look at the income gap inequality. If that isn't enough to run you over with the Mack truck, I don't know what it's going to take for the people to start to wake up and say, hey, we're not being represented. Do you think? So when you talk about, your contraception, being at issue, your wage being at issue, or your ability to have equal protection at issue, you have to realize our issue, our number one issue, all of us, and we should not be distracted by these identifying issues based on the race and gender and sexual orientation and religious, all of that. Put all that to the side. What we all have to do is come together as one, as the people, because you've got there's a percentage of 10% own like 90% of the wealth or something extreme like that.
Yes.
So you're talking about 90% of us collectively only having 10% influence. So even if we did all come together, we would lose the battle right now. We are at risk of losing our Constitution in its entirety, being an American citizen. And what does that mean? We are losing our rights slowly but surely.
But I think the problem is it's broader than that. Americans have very short-term memories, very short-term, which one, we need to vote. Okay, people say, well, minorities don't vote. Everybody's not voting. The voting is just down, okay? So we have short-term memory. We forget what happened 10 years ago, because as long as we're covering our bills and we can pay for our family to be taken care of. That's our focus. And right now, we're not doing that well.
Right.
So we can't be worried about the ERA or Child Life or VAG or anything else, because we've got to pay Edison. Because Con Ed wants their money.
Yeah.
Okay? The water company wants their money. They don't really care about your rights. And I think that's what it's come down to, because like when we look at what's going on in New York now, all right, so people are rallying because this kid, his civil rights were impaired and he died. And it's a terrible thing. It is. I'm not making light of it. But that's an issue. We need to come together as women and say, you know, we want equal rights. You know, but something's going to happen really big. Now, I honestly thought when the women voted against this in the Senate last year, that women would go out in the street in droves, and I was ready to march. I was going to be there right with them. You know what? Nothing
Nobody
happened.
said anything.
Right.
Nothing happened.
Why is there so much apathy? Is one, you mentioned about the 10% or 90% people got apathy about voting because millionaires are the ones that win elections.
Yep.
If you're not a millionaire, then the majority wins, and the minority just say, well, I'm not going to worry about getting out and vote.
Well, sure. I mean, there's about 7 billionaires in this country that are currently controlling the game. They are bankrolling these congressional elections. They're bankrolling your state house elections. They're bankrolling your school board elections, even. So, you know, it's really disturbing. And I think what we really need to start looking at is a group of amendments, because really what we're entering into is the era of much needed constitutional reform. So some of the constitutional amendments, I know that we work on at Progressive Democrats of America, in addition to the Equal Rights Amendment, is the right to vote. That is an amendment currently in the Congress that we're trying to gain support on, because the right to vote is not protected in this country right now, and technically there is no right to vote.
Yes.
So that is certainly something that needs to happen. If we can't protect our right to vote, as well as how that vote is handled, because it's another bill we're working on, Representative John Lewis, who marched for civil rights and is an icon in this country. This is his bill. And it is an omnibus voting rights bill that covers every aspect of voting rights. And if that were to be implemented, you would be able to guarantee that every vote in this country would be safe and accounted for and correct. And so if we could move that in conjunction with a constitutional amendment, making sure people have the right to vote, that could change things hugely in this country. Another constitutional amendment that we're working on is written by Congressman Rick Nolan, Minnesota. And it basically goes against this whole notion of corporations being people and money being speech. In fact, it says completely the opposite, so that we can kind of change the game and start regulating how donations are made to campaigns and candidates in this country, and start reining in what's really going on so that people actually get a say in their government again.
But the problem with that is you have a Supreme Court that you have to die out of practically to be removed unless you retire, okay? It's a lifelong position, who has sided with those powers that be to say that corporations are people too. So it's interesting that to me, it appears that the Supreme Court is tainted.
It is.
Okay, that should never have happened. That is the name itself states it, the Supreme Court. So now if we have no protection under the law by the Supreme Court, we have no protection.
But that becomes political too with the Supreme Court, right?
Yes,
It depends on who's in office and who's appoints the Supreme Court.
There's also another
justice.
piece of this with the Supreme Court that I find very bothersome. Congress has the right to go to members of the Supreme Court and to say that you're acting unethically and perhaps you need to be removed.
And they haven't.
Yes, and they have not, because they're
And
part
none
of
of
the
the banks
game.
have been arrested.
This is true.
Part of the banks have been arrested.
Yeah, none of the bankers
Oh, absolutely.
that were fraudulent,
Yes.
deceptive, and crushed this economy and
Yes.
put millions of people out of their homes.
Sure.
And none of them.
No.
Right, because
they,
they say
but
that
they
you-
weren't even prosecuted.
But if you have an overdraft on your check, do they slap that $35
No,
in
if you
there?
sell loose cigarettes, you
Oh, you
are
can
gonna
die.
lose your life.
You can lose your
Right.
life. That's
That's
right.
what I think
Right.
the march stood
Well, see,
for.
and there's where we
There
see
you
the inequality that's happening in this country.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and that is the crux of it. Yeah, I mean, the issues that we've seen going on in Ferguson and in Staten Island, these are a mirror of what's going on. This is the result of this type of legislation. This is the result of people losing their rights. This is the result of the American people no longer having a say in how our country is run and governed.
That's why I think we're coming back. I mean, I don't think any of us were even born in the 60s when the hippies were out, okay? Or we were very, very young. Okay, you probably weren't. We might have been very, very young if we were there, like 2 or 3 years old. But in the end of the 60s and the 70s, from things I read from history, people went to the streets. They went to the streets to demonstrate and say, we want equal rights, we want freedom, we want fairness. I think that's what we're coming back to. Because I listen to young people today, and then I listen to the tapes I heard of the 60s and the 70s, and I hear the same rhetoric. And I hear the same panic in their voices, because we're basically losing the middle class.
Oh, we've lost.
In the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
we were developing a middle class.
Yeah.
Or one would say, okay, well now it's pretty much gone. Okay, so if it's gone, these kids are coming out of school now, I mean, you know, with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yes.
Okay, to get an education that if they were in Europe was free. Or if they were in Canada, it's free. But we're charging hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why? Because we're paying professors, are we?
No, we have to supplement the multinational corporations who are making billions in profits. There's zero federal tax
There you
dollars.
go. There you
Because they're paying zero in federal tax.
There you go.
Our students have to fund the tax dollars that serves as revenue for the federal government to stay in operation. We need to get Congress, the members of Congress, to act in our interest. Education is number one.
Yes.
My daughter went to Cambridge University in England.
Did she?
Yes, she did.
Congratulations.
And the first year, I had to do the Parent Plus loan at 11.99% interest. Second year, she was able to get a loan from England at 0%.
Amazing.
Big difference.
Amazing.
So when we talk about other countries,
Yes.
and we're at war with other countries, and we're the shining example of how the world needs to be, that's when people need to sit there and say to themselves, do I really have the right to sit in judgment against any other person, especially those I know nothing of, nothing about, never met, they've done nothing to me.
And that's where we are right now in the news today in this
Yes.
country, right this very today. You know, we're sitting back and people are saying, America, with your torture and everything else, you're not in a position
No.
to dictate how we run our country.
Absolutely.
No, we've lost our moral authority.
Yes,
We've lost our ability to lead.
yes.
We've tarnished our image, and we're denigrating our citizens.
And if our government can't follow its own laws, and if they're above the law, how are we not a monarchy?
Well, I think there would be people who would question if we're not a monarchy.
That's what I'm here to say.
Right.
It's an oligarch. Go to Springfield, it's an oligarch. We are not a republic. That's why, you know, if we don't take action to get involved, educated, and really focus on the priorities and stop placating into all the propaganda by the left, by the right, by these extremists who want to distract us from our own individual citizenship and Americanism, we're going to lose everything.
Well, that's why I want you guys to give us a final word on what can we do now? We have like 2 minutes left. So what can we do to bring this to the public's attention? Because I think it does need to be done. I think we need to make it like it's a major thing, like it's a major thing like what's going on in New York right now.
I think, and if you don't mind, I would strongly recommend stop engaging in the football, stop engaging in the American Idol, stop engaging in all the entertainment, the TMZ, the gossip, the People magazine, everything that is distracting young people, everybody from being able to apply themselves into the Constitution, learn your legislature, learn the different bodies of government, learn their roles, get the Illinois Government Handbook. It has all their contact information. Go to ilga.gov, get their phone numbers, follow the bills that they're sponsoring, learn how to support and reach out to your neighbors, get involved with Civics 101 and grow from there. Stop making football and entertainment your number one to do and get to know what's going on in
And
the
your
government.
closing word?
My closing word is, I'd say it's very simple. If you've never done it before, find out who your member of Congress is. If you live in this area, it will now be It will now be Congressman Robert Dole.
Right.
Find out his phone number, find out his email. They have web pages. Contact them about these issues. Find out who your state legislator is. It may vary in this area. And contact them. Make it a personal appointment to go and visit them and speak with them on these issues. It is much easier than you think, and I think it's very important that you do so.
Thank you very much, Tara Thomas, for co-hosting this extremely interesting program on Equal Rights Amendment. Denise Rothiemer, the founder, legislative author, Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence, and now expert and been working with us in Springfield on this issue. Jeannie Marie Dare,
Yes.
all right, ERA State Campaign Coordinator for Illinois. She's the National Issue Team Coordinator at Progressive Democrats of America. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being attentive for this public forum on Equal Rights Amendment, and we hope that you participate in trying to get this issue passed in Springfield. Contact your state legislator. In the 6th district is Rita Mayfield, and the other districts, you know who they are, so that we can get some motion and getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed. This has been Community Forum. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.